and I suffer from obsessive-compulsive disorder as well as depression. Now, I don't know how many people identified as OCD. Sometimes people say, oh, I just got the Pokemon game, and I got to get all the Pokemons, or I'm not going to be happy or something. That's not really OCD. It's not just being anal retentive. It's a dark and troubling illness, and it's been a real struggle for me. I have a clinical diagnosis for both. I've seen a therapist and have been for over 10 years. And in all my therapy, I've discovered I don't think there's a cure. I'm never going to be fixed. But therapy helps with gaining tools to deal with my illness. And I was dealing with it pretty well before I started 24 Caret Games, and not so much during the development of Retrograde. So a little bit about Retrograde. We released last August on PlayStation 3. We spent about 4 years on the PlayStation 3 version. We just released a PC port on Steam last week, and I did that basically by myself, part-time, for 6 months. The team was roughly 3. I did the game design and gameplay programming. Justin Wilder did the engine, special effects, and tools. We worked with art contractors for the project, but we had trouble finding a good match till about the latter half of the project when we started working with Joe Grabowski. And then we contracted him full-time for the remainder of the project. On average, I worked about 80 hours a week for the 4 years of the PlayStation 3 version. The game has about 750,000 lines of code. Let me just let that sink in. 750,000 lines of code, and there's 2 programmers. That's insane. According to the Game Developer magazine, the Postmortem of Little Big Planet, they said they had about 500,000 lines of code and 37 developers. So lines of code is difficult to measure, and it's hard to compare. And it depends on the standards used. We used Code Analyzer. And the actual number is not really important. I'm not trying to say I'm better than you. I have so many lines of code. In fact, it's been a bit of a curse. But the thing that's significant about it is that we had a huge project. Why did we have so many lines of code? I wish I knew. But no, we tried to create a reusable engine that would be modular and support different projects, and all this adds complexity. So 46% of the code was the engine, in quotation fingers, because really it's just a game, right? What is the engine? It's not like we're selling it, Unreal, Retrograde, whatever, no. 38% is the game-specific code, at least in our minds, and 16% was the tools, but they shared a lot of engine components. We had a good amount of tools. There are several different features that had quite a bit of lines of code. A lot when we were trying to do procedural art. We had these animated signs for the menus, the Octoboard boss, which I'll talk more about later, and this procedural city background. And each of those things had 5,000 lines of code by themselves. So when we first started 24 Caret Games, we didn't plan on self-funding a project. We just started working on a demo. The idea was we were going to pitch ourselves to publishers. Unfortunately for us, the economy soon crashed right after we started 24 Caret, and game projects were getting canceled left and right, so it seemed unlikely we could get a gig. We decided to start self-funding a small project targeting Xbox Live and PlayStation Network, and we thought we could do it in 6 to 12 months. Seems like a reoccurring theme in the other IGS talks. But we figured that our project might not be a big money winner, but we could make a name for ourselves as a company, as a quality developer. So the concept of Retrograde is that you're playing a game backwards to the beat of the music. So it looks like a side-scrolling shooter, but it's actually a rhythm game. We were doing our own indie project, so we wanted to do something interesting and fun that would stand out. The Xbox Live and PlayStation Network space way back in 2008 was really not as competitive as it was now. We thought that even with a simple design, we were in good shape relative to the other games on the market at that time. We saw our main competition as Boom Boom Rocket, and I'm not sure if anyone even remembers Boom Boom Rocket, but I mean, it was an enjoyable rhythm game, but it was very small in scope. So after about a month and a half of work on Retrograde, we submitted our demo to IGF in October, and we were very fortunate to be nominated for Excellence in Design and Excellence in Audio. We lost our artist co-founder at the beginning of 2009 since he couldn't afford to self-fund the game. At the IGF, it was really nice because Sony came around and they were interested in getting us on PlayStation Network, which we were really excited about because we wanted to make a console game. But at this point, the bar for console indie games had really been raised by Braid and Castle Crashers, which came out after we started 24 Caret. We scrapped our schedule completely and wanted to try something more ambitious. Big mistake. We originally designed the game's graphics so we could scale down to mobile, but now we were on PlayStation 3, so we wanted to redo our art style to take advantage of its graphical horsepower. So by October of 2009, we finished the gameplay pattern for all 10 levels. The art wasn't really where we wanted it, and we were having trouble finding a good contractor. We decided to do another pass completely on the music and make it better and design the music in conjunction with the gameplay patterns. And we were adding more complicated bosses, a new player, and enemy fire types. So Retrograde became like a spoiled child, and I couldn't say no to it. Things changed in 2009 when I met my wife, Joanne. It was during a lull in the project, so I was only working 60 hours a week. Unfortunately, after a few months, I felt the pressure on Retrograde again, and I resumed working 80 hours a week and spending less time with Joanne. In 2010, we spent a lot of time on Procedural Art Generation since Justin and I, the founders, lacked artistic talent, and we had difficulty finding good contractors. We had a pseudo-realistic art style, which really makes procedural generation difficult. It's a lot harder than something abstract. We had an obsessive attention to detail, which really hurt us. At this point, we were already in perpetual crunch. We wanted to get the game out as soon as possible since we were burning through our savings. But we never looked for ways to simplify the game or shorten development time, which obviously would have been a good idea. So this is a video of our Procedural Cityscape, which I talked about before. The buildings have little lights on the windows, and they go on and off based on time of day. So during night, there's more windows on, and see now most of the windows are off, and then we have the lens flare and the sunrise. Oops, wrong button. So in 2010, I knew I wanted to marry Joanne. When she was visiting her family in the Philippines, I made a co-op video game to propose to her. I basically placed the wedding ring in a battery pack of the controller, and then I sort of tricked her into playing it because I'm like, oh, I'm playing this IGF game, and it's co-op, so I really need your help playing it. And then at the end of the game, I put in a fake message saying, like, hey, you know, player 2 out of batteries. Luckily, she didn't know what the Xbox battery icon looked like, so I just had something in there. Anyway, I got down on one knee to fiddle with a USB cable, and I told her to look at the batteries, and so she popped it out and found the ring. So fortunately, she said yes, although I did program in a response for no. It's pretty cool. There's actually, I invented a pixel particle system, so there's just like tears streaming down, but it's all pixels aligned to the grid. So I recorded her reaction too with the webcam, and I put it up on YouTube, and you can find it, and I think it's pretty cool. I don't know, and I think I put up the losing crying as well. But the bad part is because of my financial investment in Retrograde, I couldn't afford a nice wedding. Joanne was very understanding, and we decided to just get married right away without a ceremony and delay our church wedding until I finished Retrograde, or at least that was the plan. So in 2011, my motto was release or die trying. I spent a lot of time on detailed animations for the bosses and complicated attacks and behavior. So this is the Octoborg boss I mentioned earlier that's 5,000 lines of code. He has all sorts of procedural attacks and animations and complications. We also redesigned our entire pipeline at this point so the artist could animate the backgrounds as a Maya scene, and then we export all the keyframes for the objects. And so this video is also a good example of that. You can see all the crazy animated stuff. As the year progressed, I felt like we could finish by the end of the year, but we'd be in the holiday season, which is a bad time to release for an indie game, so we might as well spend extra time on it. Of course, this is after over 3 years of development. I was really terrified to release the game for fear of failure. I felt like the more I worked on it, the better the game was, which would increase our chances for success. However, the longer development meant it was a bigger risk, which made me even more terrified to release. In the back of our minds, I think we really knew the game would never be profitable for the amount of time we put into it, but we never changed the way we developed, despite that. So Joanne wanted our church wedding in fall of 2011, and even earlier in the year, I was beginning to think that I might not finish Retrograde before then, which of course makes things very difficult. I managed to pick up some work on the side to help make ends meet and pay for a church wedding, but I didn't put Retrograde on hold, so I doubled my workload, which of course meant even less time with my wife. For our wedding celebration, I only took off Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and I think I actually worked a half day on that Friday. I made so many personal sacrifices for Retrograde. I felt like I had to make the game amazing to justify those, which really compelled me to keep working hard on it, even if it was my swan song. So at the beginning of 2012, I was really depressed. It didn't feel like the end would ever be in sight. I felt like I'd be working on it forever, and I wanted to quit game development completely. The only reason I kept working on Retrograde was because I felt an obligation to the fans who played the game at PAX, IGF, and Indiecade, and who were really looking forward to its release. Even still, we refused to make compromises to get the game out of the door earlier. For example, we ran out of memory, and instead of downsampling textures or having loading screens, we redesigned the engine to support streaming. We also had unnecessary polish. We created the challenge mode map, which you saw at the beginning of the video, which is like Super Mario World and has secret passages. We added alternate ships with characters from other indie games like Octodad, Super Meat Boy. And we have a DJ deck-based music player, which on PlayStation 3 is actually controllable with the DJ Hero controllers. And then we have unlockable concept art, cheats, and more than I can even list. So for my wife's 2012 spring break, she wanted to go on a trip with me. She works for the LA school system, so she likes to do something fun when she's off. And so her original plan was a night at a bed and breakfast. Of course, one evening at a bed and breakfast doesn't seem like a big deal, but it was right before PAX East, and we were nearing release, at least in my mind, so I was really non-committal. She ended up settling for an entire day out and eating out and going to museums, and these are just things we always wanted to do but never got a chance to because of my work schedule. At the end of the day, she was so happy, and she thanked me for such an amazing day. At that point, I realized, what have I become? I was not the person I wanted to be. I never imagined that I'd be the type of husband who would ignore his wife to work all the time. It's definitely not how I pictured my married life. So we finally felt like we did everything we could to make the game successful and submitted it at the end of June. The reviews were good. We had an average of 80% on GameRankings.com. The main complaint in the reviews were that there's only 10 songs, which honestly is one of the better complaints you can have. I want more. But given the obsessive level of detail we had, there was no way we could afford to do any more content in a reasonable time frame, nor could we afford to keep funding development. So this is the final feature list of Retrograde. We did 1080p, 60 frames a second with anti-alias, and someone at Sony thought that was a PlayStation 3 first. We had dynamic lighting and shadows, potential visibility set generator for object culling, background streaming for all data, blah, blah, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. Now, with all that applause, you'd think that that was actually an accomplishment, but none of that actually helped sales. I think, actually, we may have sold less copies of the game than there are people in this room here. I'm kidding, but not by much. So the game went on sale August 21st, and as I said, the sales fell dramatically short of our relatively modest expectations. I'm honestly too embarrassed to show the y-axis on the graph, but trust me that even those peaks are low. So the initial sales trade off quickly, and we did 2 sales. This is just the PlayStation Network data. We launched last week on Steam, so I don't have fancy graphs for that. But I mean, the sales were at a larger discount, and they moved more units than launched, but didn't make as much money. But why didn't the game sell? I wish I knew. Any business endeavor is a risk, and of course, they don't all pay off. I mean, certainly the Kickstarter, 30%, only 30% get their funding. I mean, for Retrograde, we didn't get a huge amount of press. I'm surprised you people are here. No one's even heard of the game. But anyway, given our awards and showing off the game at PAX year after year, I thought we would do much better. So what did I learn? It's really tough to come up with things because it still hurts to think about. When I do think about it, I have obsessive thoughts about how I'm a failure and a bad game developer, and everything is my fault. And honestly, those thoughts really ring true, which makes them very difficult to block out. However, there are several lessons that are fairly apparent. Don't compete where you can't. We spend a huge amount of time on our 3D rendering tech and all those bullet points and graphical polish, but we can't compete with AAA games and big studios on 3D graphics quality, so it was really a bad idea to try. We spent so much time on graphics, both from the content side and the tech side. Will this feature increase sales? When creating something out of love, it's a bad question to ask. It doesn't feel right. However, if you have to make money off a project to maintain the life you want to live, it's something you should think about. I'm not recommending that you compromise your vision based on what you think will sell. I think that's a terrible idea. But I think asking yourself that question gives you an important perspective. At the very least, you can ask, for feature X, what is the net impact on the player's experience? These questions are a good sanity check for how you should be spending your development time. We lost sight of this earlier in development because we wanted to make the game we never got a chance to at other studios because we always had these really tight deadlines. So this is our in-game concept art viewer, which has fancy pixel shader transition effects and streaming JPEG decompression. Probably a poor use of our time. Focusing our efforts on creating a gameplay content instead of the visuals would have allowed us to release sooner and been a better game overall. Although I did the game design and gameplay programming, I spent much more time on graphics and procedural animation and effects. So this is an image from our Skydome system. And so how it works is it projects frustums on the sky sphere and then generates clipped geometry. The idea is then the clip geometry is rendered with decals tied into the environment map, and then it's composited in the pixel shader with multi-texturing because we wanted to reduce fill rate. Because then we basically only have to draw the sky sphere once, and we don't have to draw separate geometry for the cards. I spent about a month on it. Really, we should have just gotten an artist to make more cube maps or been content with less details. I mean, I don't know if you noticed the sky domes in the previous videos, but I'm betting not. I really should have been making more content, more songs for the actual game, making the game. Live the life you want to live. Even if Retrograde were successful, I'm not sure all the sacrifices I made would have been worth it. The development of the game was, quite frankly, miserable, and it put a huge strain on my marriage right as it was beginning. I'm now trying to work 40 hours a week, and I quite honestly feel like I'm getting to know my wife for the first time, which is pathetic and sad. I feel immensely guilty for putting her through the development of Retrograde. And while she was very supportive and patient, that wasn't something she should have had to put up with. So this is more of the Mobius proposal. And I did all the art, programming, music, and everything. And that worked pretty well. It's not the best looking game, as you can tell. But I managed to come up with an art style that I could deliver on with my limited 3D modeling skills. Unfortunately, on Retrograde, we didn't get the people we needed or designed for the people we had. We lost our artists early on and had little success finding a contractor that could create the content we wanted. We should have switched the art style to be more abstract and then committed to procedural graphics. We ended up building the tech to do completely artist-driven content, but it was after we already wasted a lot of time trying to do these pseudo-realistic graphics procedurally. Well, duh. I'm sure you're all saying these mistakes seem obvious. Why is that guy even up here? He doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, the real question is, why did we fall down this path? And I have a few ideas. I don't think AAA development methodologies adapt well on the small scale. I worked on a number of projects at supposed AAA studios, doing the big budget titles. And I thought, oh man, I'm going to kick ass as an indie because I have all this experience. But I don't think the mindset was right. So this is a directory map of our insane code base. We built out all these systems and modules to create this engine that was supposed to be used for future games. But honestly, we probably won't use the engine again because the game was unsuccessful. And really, I'm trying to focus now on creating games that are easier to make content for. So all of this effort was a waste. We really should have focused on the minimum effort to get this project done. If we succeeded, then we should have started worrying about the next one. It sounds silly to say don't plan for the long term, but if you don't know if there is a long term, it makes a lot of sense. So polish matters. I think most successful games deliver a really polished experience. And we recognize the importance of polish, but we went way overboard. So this is a video of the final boss. The iris on his eye is hinged like a proper mechanical iris. But of course, you can't tell because it's like 10 pixels, even at 1080p. He makes a number of expressions throughout the boss battle. I thought they gave the boss some personality. But no one has ever mentioned these animations in any review or fan tweets. I'm really betting no one ever noticed. Why did we go so overboard? I think partially because it was our baby, partially because we completely lost sight of the business aspect. And we really felt like making a great game was the key to success. But that isn't enough anymore. We never reevaluated our decisions. When we started going down an avenue, that was how we saw the game. We never took a step back to try and figure out what we could achieve the same gameplay in an easier way. In hindsight, I wish we would have made the game in 2D. I think it would have looked better and finished way earlier. We began building 3D tech because we felt like we had a lot of computer graphic skills and we could differentiate ourselves from other indies. But once we decided on Retrograde, we never stopped and said, hey, the game's in 2D. Why don't we make it in 2D? Instead, we decided to do 1080p, 60 frames a second with anti-aliasing instead of 720p like everyone else. It required a ton of optimization and engine work to pull off. It contributed to our enormous code base, which of course makes porting more daunting. We get a lot of requests for a Vita Port, but bringing the game to any new platform is very difficult because of the immense code base and its complexity. So what's next? Justin Wilder, the other remaining founder of 24 Caret Games, left and got a full-time gig. I'm still trying to find balance in my life. I don't want to neglect my responsibilities to my family. I want to work reasonable hours and spend time with my wife. And realistically, I need to start getting paid for work. I'm hoping to do another indie game and apply the lessons I've learned, but I'm not sure I can afford to. Retrograde has not been profitable, and perhaps there's hope on PC, but I've kind of lost my confidence. And certainly getting money for a project at the beginning is tricky, and I took lots of notes at the Kickstarter presentation, but hopefully I'll be able to continue living my dream of being an indie developer, but it may not be possible to balance my life and have the career I want, which is unfortunate, but that just may be in the cards for me. So hopefully that's not, fingers crossed. So thank you for listening. I really appreciate your time. I hope you found this helpful. Does anyone have any questions? I have time.
Does that work? Sorry. Sorry to interrupt, but I have an announcement to make. It will be short. So when you started the conference, most people didn't leave the room. So if you could please let us scan your badges on your way out, so you can receive the survey and fill it up. It's important to us and to the speaker too. So please, there will be 3 exits, and you will be asked to have your badges scanned. So that's it. Now you can go back to the questions.
So we can do questions or no? Yes. OK, cool.
Yeah, you can have the questions.
Go for it.
First off, thank you so much. That was really raw and intense, and I don't know about everybody else, but I really appreciate you being that honest and frank about that. My Steam login doesn't work for some reason. I was just about to buy the game right now, but I assure you when I get home I'll be buying the game on Steam, because there's no question. I've played it at all the different PAXs and things. I really appreciated when you guys did the shirt promo. I still have mine. But I guess what I wanted to say, I just interviewed Andy Schatz, who's been working on Monaco now for 3.5 years. And he had a lot of similar things, a lot of, this should have been simpler, but he wanted a lot of ownership, and I think what you're talking about is not isolated. I think a lot of developers in the indie space want to own the code, want to have had AAA experience and moved on. So I guess I just appreciate your specific insight and just want to let you know, at the very least, someone else I talked to had a very similar raw experience of dealing with a new marriage while making a game and all that sort of stuff. You're not alone out there. Keep it up. I hope that the next project you have is that perfect balance of your creativity and getting paid. Thanks again.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks a third time. So that gigantic code base that you're probably never going to use, is that headed to the graveyard, or would you consider sharing?
Honestly, I don't think I would wish it on anyone. Because, I mean, we did some really unique technical stuff that's very applicable to retrograde. So if you want to make a game exactly like retrograde, then, well, it's still incredibly complicated, but it'll do retrograde really well. But anything else, I mean, I don't think it's really helpful to anyone, unfortunately.
Hey, the game looked really great. I played before, and it was really awesome. And I know you took it to PAX and you got feedback on it. I was just wondering, at any point did you consider bringing a producer on, maintaining control and everything yourself? But I know you got playtesting. You would have gotten feedback from that as to what people wanted. I was wondering if you'd ever consider, if you consider in the future bringing bringing an external producer on, or someone you knew, or some friend, to just sanity check the sort of stuff that I just know I find it really handy in my stuff to get other people to come and tell me that I really shouldn't be spending ages on this feature that no one's going to see.
Well, I mean, it's tough because we wanted to make the game for ourselves. We wanted to do everything the way we wanted. Because at studios, I don't know how many people, has anyone worked at a AAA studio or worked for someone else? Show of hands. How many people worked there had a bad decision forced down their throats, and there was nothing they could do about it? So I would have expected a few more hands, but you guys are lucky. But I mean, it's a lot of times, people say, this is the way we're doing it, and their reasoning may not make sense to you. It may not make sense at all, but you just have to deal with it. And so with retrograde, we're like, yes, we're free of the bonds, we're free of the shackles, but then we wasted our freedom on obsessing on all these details. So no, it never entered into our heads that we should bring anyone else on, that we should consult people. It was just like, this is our baby, this is what we have to do. We need to finish it, and we need to finish it our way, which is stupid, if you didn't catch the gist of the talk.
Hi, I wanted to say thanks for sharing and for to provide some context. I also suffer from severe OCD, and I have that regular struggle when I'm making a game that I'll know I'm spending way too much time on a feature that no one else is going to care about or even notice, and so it's great to just know that someone else is out there who struggles with that same thing. And as far as the question goes, I wonder, moving forward, since it is a continuing struggle, how you feel you are going to learn from that experience and approach finding that balance in a new way now that you have that behind you.
Well, I mean, certainly, I mean, it's tough. It's a struggle. I think everything in life is a struggle, right? It's not just me with obsessive-compulsive disorder. It's not just certain people with problems. Everyone struggles with development. Game development is hard. And certainly, if you listen to any talks today, I think you would get that message. But I think with all your experience and every time you do it, you take something from it. And certainly, I've taken a lot from it. Like, I have to be hyper-vigilant that I'm not wasting time. And, it's really tough because polish matters. Sometimes those details really make the difference between, a 90 or an 80. And I can't say I have a formula, but certainly I at least have some perspective that doing things that no one will ever notice probably not a good usage of time. So I hope that answers your question. I wish I had better answers than that.
Thanks.
OK, last question, but I'll be out in the hall if anyone wants to ask more.
Quick question. What happened to your hat?
Well, so the story behind that is one of the things with 24 Caret Games is I tried to do branding. So I tried to dress crazy. I had like a gold miner's hat with a light on it. And then, I would do all these events in this gold miner persona. But part of the problem is 24 Caret Games is sort of dead because it's just me. So even moving forward, I don't know if I can create games as 24 Caret Games because I don't have 100% ownership in the company. So I may have to retire the poor miner. But also, besides getting the right color shirt for the video recording, which they're very specific about, I wanted to give this talk as myself, if that makes any sense. I don't know. Certainly when I did the miner thing, I tried to have this very positive, buy our game, it's great, I'm a salesman, which it takes a lot of energy. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but oh my gosh, PAX and doing that salesman thing, it's killer. Oh, I'm just so drained every day, oh my gosh. So this is me, the regular me. Hopefully I can still put on a good show. Thank you so much for your time. And I'll be...
Regular you was awesome.
Thank you.